Hey, everybody. This is Nevin, your host of the Patriotic Populist. And tonight I'm going to be doing a solo live stream. I'm inspired. Had a great day at work today. Stayed busy. Had a great workout. Cooked some pork chops in the air fryer for my meal prep for the week. And I got some skinless chicken drumsticks marinating. If you ever save sauces from, like, whether it's the Chinese restaurant or Chick-fil-A, because my daughter eats Chick-fil-A, and you have some of the leftover sauces, like the Polynesian sauce, for example, from Chick-fil-A, I just use it as a marinade and just smothered my skinless chicken drumsticks in it, and now it's marinating overnight, and tomorrow early morning I'll be cooking it in the air fryer as the other part of my meal prep for lunches and dinners for the rest of this week. So really good day, great workout, really kicked my butt. My usual workout during the week. I live in an old school kind of apartment building, so I'll walk up and down the stairs, 59 steps up, 59 steps down for half an hour. I do that 3 or 4 times a week. And then on Saturdays and Sundays, usually I'll take about a 4.5 mile walk around the city that I live in, which is Coral Springs, Florida. Nice little community here. So anyways, you don't want to hear about my cooking and my working out and stuff, but then again, it puts a little bit of a human face on me. It shows that I have a life outside of politics. Had a mostly great weekend. Got to see my daughter Emily do another circus troupe show at Flamingo Gardens. For those of you who live in South Florida, you have families, you love nature, you love birds, it's one of the places to go on the parrot jungle down in downtown Miami area. So had for the most part, a great weekend. There was a big bump, but I think that's in the process of being resolved, which is good. And just moving onward and upward. So I feel inspired to do a live stream. So we were talking about on the show with Herschel and I, what was that, on Saturday night? We were talking about a passage from an article written by J.R. Nyquist, who is really, in many respects, really one of the best analysts when it comes to national security. He's first rate when it comes to foreign affairs. He totally understands the history of communism, the threat of Russia and China. And he's aware of this, so it's not like I'm talking behind his back. I've talked about this stuff privately. And he wrote a passage that really, I'm sorry to say, he's just flat out wrong, and with all due respect, is not helpful to the struggle against political extremism in this country and its appeals. So let me reread it again so we can have an understanding of, what he's saying and also the points I am trying to make here. Just give me a few moments here. Okay, so it is a very old idea to blame the capitalists. There's no question. Capitalists often are the butt or the target of political extremists. There's no question about that. In many ways, it's an easy target, much of which is the fault of the capitalists. They don't help make their case against their opponents. With the deregulation, the outsourcing of jobs, what's going on in Amazon with the workers urinating in bottles because they strictly control the breaks. You can't even take a break because the bathroom is like 10 minutes away. So, and just, it's almost like a stock of a night labor system, if you will. Hot warehouses where the air conditioning is non-existent or poor. These issues with ambulances being stationed outside of Amazon warehouses, et cetera, et cetera. You get the drift. You can Google it and do the research. It's very well documented. really many in the big capitalists really do not make a good case for themselves, and their actions and even the things that they say really provide easy fodder for communists and national socialists and fascist types. So I said it's a very old idea to blame the capitalists. Shall we now link arms with the Marxist revolutionaries? We're all Bolsheviks now, right and left. Well, stop. Does that mean that critics of corporate capitalism like myself and Herschel want to or have any desire, or are we politically stupid enough to link arms with Marxist revolutionaries? No, because we have two different goals. Just because you're strong critics of various forms of capitalism doesn't mean A, we want to abolish the system, and B, that we're suicidal enough to clink glasses and join arms with Marxist revolutionaries who at the end of the day would kill us. So we're all Bolsheviks now, right and left. Well, Bolshevism is a phenomenon of the left, first of all, the extreme left, number one. Number two, with Bolshevism, look, I'm a staunch critic of unrestrained corporate capitalism and laissez-faire economics. Doesn't mean I'm a Bolshevik. There are conservatives, old school type conservatives, American Compass and journals like American Compass, The American Conservative, American Affairs. These are journals of the dissident right without being obviously fascistic. Are they Bolsheviks? No. Clearly not communist, clearly not Bolshevik. These are just critics of capitalism coming from a different framework. So just because you're criticizing capitalism doesn't mean you're a Bolshevik. Now, Nyquist writes, no more capitalism is the underlying message as everyone cries out against the 1%. Well, because the 1% have treated their employees shitty and have captured our government and stymie and block legislation that would actually help, in many cases, our national security as far as trade policy goes, as well as improving the standard of living of the vast majority of people. So frankly, I have no sympathy for the 1%. They basically invite all of the opprobrium that they get through their bad behavior and their, frankly, sociopathic decision-making and mentality that they have. Don't believe me? Just Google the articles. You'll find many academic and non-academic articles that document what I'm saying. No one seems to understand that our comfortable way of life is the chief product of the 1%. However, infiltrated and duped that 1%, it is as duped as the 99%. We are all useful idiots. Well, the difference between the 99% does not have nearly the same power as the 1%. The 1% control the government. They have much more power than the disorganized masses in the United States that are too atomized, they're too divided, they're busy trying to support themselves and their family. But the 1%, they have much more in the way of resources. They are organized. They have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They have a variety of corporate conservative organizations, the National Association of Manufacturers. The 1% have plenty of power. You cannot compare the 99% with the 1%. 1% have power. Look at the study written by Benjamin Page and Martin Gillens, data from 2014. Studied public policy, congressional votes, I believe, clearly showed that the super wealthy, this quote unquote 1%, have tremendous power. So really, this is where Nyquist really messes up. And I like Nyquist, and as a person, he's a great guy. But I have to call him out on this. And he is really wrong. And that kind of verbiage, if somebody's reading that, who is trying to explore the type of political ideas that they want to acquire, they're exploring political ideas, they see that, and they're a young person and they're working very hard and whatnot, and they're not making a lot of money and they're financially stressed, they're going to read that and say, this guy doesn't represent me. But somebody like Caleb Maupin, who's a hardline tanky Stalinist, or Danny Haiphong, also formerly of the Workers' World Party, just like Caleb Maupin, and who's a communist and an apologist for China. and a big supporter and collaborator with Communist China, Deng Haifeng, that is, well, they're going to have more appeal because they're going to speak to people's real needs. And people will ignore, oh, well, you know, they're communists, so what? They're going to present to me a better life. A little tip, drink plenty of water after a good workout. Best way to go. Anyways, so he's just flat out wrong. And that actually what he wrote in that blog post, it's discussion below his excellent article, Grand Strategy Part 3 in his series, very well documented stuff. This is where he really doesn't shine, unfortunately, on this type of economic policy and social policy. Because he just mirrors the worst libertarians, the worst corporate conservatives, essentially. Now, the way the economy functions based on actually looking at the world as is, the way the economy functions, formally our prosperity, and arguably our prosperity is very tenuous. The American dream is rapidly collapsing, starting in the 1980s and moving forward. You have people working multiple jobs. Wages have not risen functionally since at least the 1970s. You have the destruction of unions, deregulation, financialization of the economy. I mean, is it prosperity when in Sydney, Nebraska, that hedge fund guy, Paul Singer, big donor to Republicans, even though he did really well, and just because he wanted to boost his profit margins further, just decided to close down an entire office park, essentially, that employed many within the town of Sydney, Nebraska. Is that prosperity? Why don't you talk to them about prosperity? I think they would disagree with you, and I think they would be mighty pissed at the 1%. So how does the economy, getting back to my original point here, how does the economy actually function? What are the roles of the various economic actors in maintaining national prosperity and a functioning economy? Well, number one, you do have the 1%. You have the investors and you have the property owners. They have the ideas. Theoretically, they may have excellent management skills, not always, as we've seen countless examples. Just because you're an executive doesn't mean you're a good steward of your company necessarily. But you have the investors and you have the property owners, the holder of capital. They do take great risks, as I brought up in the show a few days earlier in our discussion with Herschel. But it takes more than that, because the investments and the ideas of the capitalists and the entrepreneurs don't mean shit when you don't have well-paid and motivated employees to be loyal to the company and produce the goods and services. Because without them, all your capital and all your property and all your machinery, which obviously is a form of capital, computers, office buildings, whatever, it's meaningless without well-compensated, theoretically compensated workers and who are hopefully well-motivated. Then you also have the consumers. Consumers have to have money to buy your products. Otherwise, your product is just going to pile up in warehouses and pile up on the store shelves. You need somebody to buy it, and they need to have money. Get it? So the 1% is not the only force that is responsible for a functioning economy, let alone prosperity. You have to have consumers and you have to have workers, meaning employees. That's how you have it. And then you also have to have government and the nation state too. They'll protect your assets through the police, the military, they construct infrastructure, public schools and the public universities and private universities train the workforce or technical schools. You get my point. The national economy, forget all this libertarian, liberal, laissez-faire economic bullshit. That's garbage. That's just as ideological as Marxism, okay? Throw it all in the garbage already. It's garbage. It's garbage economics. It's what the economist Ian Fletcher referred to as faith-based economics. So in that respect, it's very similar to Marxism, in the sense that, you know, Marx's plan to create an economy is just as crazy as libertarian believers in libertarianism. It's crap, 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 crap. Okay? But the economy is like an organism. It's like the human body. So it's all of its composite parts, the workers, the consumers, the government, and government infrastructure and education, and all the rest of it, and the capitalists, all working together. And in a radical nationalist state, or radical civic nationalist state, that I would like to see triumph in the United States, the government, the federal government, would also serve to balance competing interests, to prevent class war, either from the right or the left. We have to start exploring some new ideas in governance to supplement and complement our system of constitutional laissez-faire liberalism when it comes to politics. So we have to take a look in really kind of melding those two forces together. How we do it is a separate discussion. But one point that Jeff made, however infiltrated and duped, it makes it think that they don't know what they're doing. That, oh, they're just brainwashed. And I wonder if conservatives like Jeff would give the same benefit of the doubt to, I don't know, somebody with less power, an immigrant. Maybe they didn't know the law or whatever. But I digress. The fact of the matter is yes, they are infiltrated, the 1%. Yes, they are manipulated. But in reality, it's not so innocent. And I'm going to read to you, and I know some of you are not crazy about me reading these things, and I totally get that. So these forces of the 1%, they're totally motivated by greed. That's really what it comes down to. These people are greedy. And when you look at actually what they say, they don't care about the United States of America. They don't. These are gentlemen and ladies that are citizens, consider themselves citizens of the world, which is very convenient because in reality, all they want to do is just make money and they don't care who they harm. It just doesn't matter. And we've gone over this before. I've even mentioned this in interviews in Jeff's program. And I've read quotes from the New York Times from former hedge fund traders who say they don't care about America. They just are concerned about the quarterly profits and amassing wealth so that they can afford different luxuries in life. Really, the communists know that many within the corporate America are just a bunch of greedy motherfuckers. They're just a bunch of greedy bastards. There are some in the 1% historically that have been very patriotic. Aaron Feuerstein, Felix Rohatyn. Met wealthy people when I was in the Coalition for a Prosperous America who are very patriotic and really have their hearts in the right places and run fine manufacturing enterprises. Roger Milliken, major textile magnate from the South, another American entrepreneurial hero. And he was anti-union, but there was really no need for a union because he treated his workers well. And his workers produced in return. It has to be a two-way street. Employees have to work hard, and the employer should reward it so that they're able to live adequately and be a part of the community. So to give you an example of what the bloodthirsty, conniving communists understand about capitalists, they understand how they're greedy, that they're just motivated by greed, not because they're idiots, they're just greedy. So the communists are going to exploit it. They'd be like, okay, these people are going to serve us on so many fronts. So give me an example. Even American communist leaders understood it. Sam Marcy was the founder and the longtime head of the Workers' World Party, which is this Trotskyite organization, communist group. He wrote in the publication Workers' World, party's newspaper, in September 1988, Sam Marcy wrote, "True, the capitalist class will sell even the rope used to hang them, as Lenin said. It is true that the strategic interests of the imperialist bourgeoisie would dictate a total boycott rather than any trade. But they are constrained by their own avaricious and predatory chase for super profits." That's not useful, idiot. That's not dupe. That is what studies have shown called corporate sociopathy. They don't care. They have no sense of shame. They have no sense of guilt. And if this was an average person, they would be locked up in jail as a criminal or in a mental hospital because they're a dangerous society. So therefore, the big corporations, as much as they do bring benefits, they are also, their political power, their outsized political power represents a danger to society. Because again, as Marcy said, Sam Marcy wrote, they are constrained by their own avaricious and predatory chase for super profits. So again, it is true, as Marcy said, it is true that the strategic interests of the imperialist bourgeoisie would dictate a total boycott rather than any trade, but they are constrained by their own avaricious and predatory chase for super profits. That has compelled the imperialist bourgeoisie to deal with the USSR in trade and the sale of some technology. There you go. There you go. I have nothing else to say. It almost speaks for itself. This is where the state, a much more powerful state than what these teabagger, libertarian, corporate conservative, corporate Democrats, and globalists, corporate globalists say, oh, we have to have a limited government and small government. No, you need big government. You need big government at times to constrain the power of the big capitalists. Sam Marcy and other communist leaders, then and now, Islamist leaders in Iran, they all understand that the big bourgeoisie, the big corporations, Wall Street, they can be exploited. And they know how bad the dictators in Beijing and Moscow and Caracas and Havana and Tehran and other totalitarian states, they know how bad they are. It's all over the place. Trade with Russia and China have been debated in the Senate and the House for decades. And all the mass human rights violations, repression, torture, mass murder, war planning, militarism, support for anti-American movements globally, it's all covered. The business lobby hears it. They don't care. So let's stop apologizing for the frickin' 1%. I am going to beat this theme as long as I have a show, as long as I have my health, and as long as I'm walking this face of this earth, even if I have to speak to 2 people. Now, you're probably saying, hey, Nev, can you give me some proof that many within the 1% are ill-intentioned? They know what they're doing and they don't care? Well, absolutely. Sabotaging American policy all the time. I'll read it from my book. Sorry, I mean, some of you don't like it, but I have to back up my information with facts here. For example, big business interests eager to conduct trade with the communist Vietnam exerted pressure on elected officials back in the 1980s and 1990s who in turn quashed any inquiries into the whereabouts of American POWs held by the Vietnamese and their allies in Laos and Cambodia. When the Japanese firm Toshiba Corporation exported propeller silencer technology to the Soviets for their nuclear submarines, their ballistic missile submarines, the Reagan administration and multinational corporations dependent on trade with Tokyo killed any prospects of sanctions on our quote-unquote ally in Japan. Under pressure from politically powerful multinational corporations, the Reagan administration abolished the Senior Interagency Group for International Economic Policy in 1985. That agency was responsible for blocking some technology transfers from the US to the Soviet Union and its allies. As a former insider in the Reagan administration noted, Reagan was listening to the complaints in the business community that national security was preempting or dominating their quest for exports and jobs, and the result is what you see today. The business voice eventually became dominant, and that's a recipe for disaster. Powerful multinational corporations seem to have stymied efforts to impose tighter sanctions on Putin's Russia in the wake of the invasion of Crimea. InfoWars correctly noted that, quote, Obama and Congress may rant about the evil Vladimir Putin and the aggressive Russian bear, but that's all hot air and rhetoric. Transnational corporations and international banks own Congress. They get Congress critters elected and reelected and write Obama's teleprompter script. They are not about to let billions of dollars slide down the tubes because of troubles in Russia's backyards. AMC Studios was forced to drop any references to invading Chinese troops in the remake of the classic 1980s Cold War film Red Dawn. AMC Studios was threatened by China with a loss of market access. The invaders were replaced by North Koreans supported by the Russians. What else? Citibank and JP Morgan refused to disconnect Iran from the SWIFT network, which is used for clearing international financial transactions. Their refusal to consider our country's national security placed them at odds with the set of sanctions imposed on Iran by the Trump administration. When the Trump administration imposed more sanctions on communist Venezuela, a group of Southern Republican senators, Bill Cassidy, John Cornyn, Thad Cochran, and Roger Wicker, lobbied against oil sanctions targeted at Venezuela's oil industry, since a number of refiners were located in their states. There was no doubt that corporations which refine Venezuelan oil exerted pressure on these senators. American businessmen even violated the spirit of our trade laws and collaborated with the official Cuban Chamber of Commerce in circumventing the U.S. embargo on the Castro dictatorship. More recently, Google refused to work with the American military, yet was more than willing to work with the Chinese government in censoring China's citizens and developing tracking software for the PRC authorities. Ethan Gutmann, a former consultant to American multinational corporations operating in China, and the former vice chair of the Government Relations Committee for the American Chamber of Commerce in Beijing, recounted that, quote, when Harry Wu, who was a prominent Chinese dissident, and I held a press conference in Congress on Cisco's PoliceNet, several prominent congressmen, both Democrat and Republican, who were slated to speak were no-shows. Why? In confidence, a representative admitted that Cisco had warned them not to attend. And consider, an unnamed Cisco representative was recently quoted in a major trade publication saying that I had never produced one shred of evidence to support my claims. American multinational corporations with investments in trade with Red China pressured the U.S. Trade Representative to halt any actions against cyber espionage, even against their own firms. James McGregor, a former chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, claimed the big corporations, quote, didn't want to take any action that would jeopardize the billions of dollars of trade we were doing at the time. According to, okay, what else? During the 1960s, individual American firms and engineers protested the export of ball bearings to the USSR, which in turn were utilized for the development of Soviet missile guidance systems. IBM fired engineers who opposed the sale of computers to the USSR during the 1950s and 1960s. Nike, Coca-Cola, Apple, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the American Apparel and Footwear Association opposed a proposed law that would have banned the importation of goods produced by Uyghurs enslaved in prisons. How about that? So, and I have more. Let's go more. Let's see. Let us see. CCC. Let's see. Let me see what I can find here. Oh, dear. While present at a meeting of Soviet trade officials and American corporate executives affiliated with Uztech, an admiral recalled how our capitalists were, quote, bragging as if they had sold a ton of Frankfurters. When fears were expressed that a $700 million loan dispersed by the First Chicago National Bank to the USSR would finance Moscow's intercontinental ballistic missile modernization program, a representative of that bank responded, quote, it could, of course, but we would hope not. We can't control that. When asked about the use of a loan dispersed to Bulgaria, Daniel Davidson, the head of the London branch of the Morgan Guarantee Bank, nonchalantly noted, quote, for all we know, they may be buying uranium with it. Uztech, which was the U.S. Soviet Trade and Economic Council, which was a body that consisted of American multinational corporations, including a number that were military contractors, as well as Soviet trade officials, including ones that were Soviet KGB and GRU officers. So the Uztech president, James Giffen, even believed that it was in the American national interest to convert the USSR into a, quote, economic superpower. Ernst & Young, KPMG, Deloitte, and PricewaterhouseCoopers publish ads in 3 Hong Kong newspapers which oppose the pro-democracy movement. They believe that the pro-democracy demonstrators would threaten corporate investments in communist-occupied Hong Kong. American business lobbyists begged the Chinese communist rulers to temporarily hold off their aggressive moves against Taiwan until after the congressional vote on permanent normal trade relations in the year 2000. The multinational corporations also lobbied for China to serve as the host for the 2008 Olympics. They leveraged the Taiwan issue for Beijing to be chosen. The multinational corporations alleged that such a measure would buy 8 years of peace with Taiwan, excuse me. Gosh. So on and on and on and on. I mean, it's just, and I can just bore you with more and more details. And this is, of course, in my book, Turning the Page. My journey from being a conservative to a radical civic nationalist. And there's just, a lot more going on here. I mean, on and on and on and on and on it goes. And this is what we're faced with. So when I'm reading all of this, the capitalists, many of these multinational corporations and Wall Street investment firms, they know what they're doing. They know these governments are bad. And they're violating U.S. policy, which is not even as heavily enforced because the political power of the capitalists is really not adequately controlled by the state, by the central state. In a radical civic nationalist government, mark my words, that will change. That will change big time. That needs to change. If we are to survive as a viable, sovereign nation that is strong and powerful and united, radical civic nationalists, patriotic populists, we need to smash the power of the big capitalists and the Wall Street oligarchs. Doesn't mean we're going to kill them. It doesn't mean we're going to create some Nazi or fascist totalitarian state. But they're not going to influence us. We're going to take away their lobbying power. Sure, they can redress their grievances with the government. They can walk into the president's office, the senator's office, whichever, state their case, move on. But the congressman, the president, or the senator, with new campaign finance laws and anti-lobbying laws, these capitalist motherfuckers are no longer to be able to blackmail and bribe through campaign finance and lobbying. They're no longer going to be able to pressure our senators, our representatives, and our president, and our cabinet secretaries. No way. The laws are going to be changed. And I don't care how much Mark Levin and Glenn Beck and all conservative incorporated, they're going to be like, oh, that's a violation of our free speech. Well, you know what? That ain't free speech. That is using the system for sectoral benefits by a class interest that don't give a flying fig Newton about the national interest. It's just like the National Lawyers Guild, that Communist Party USA front. They would basically, they have said, this is in a history of the Lawyers Guild, in the book, a scholarly resource on the National Lawyers Guild, and it reproduced guild officials and presidents to say, well, we're going to use a bourgeois system to overthrow the bourgeois state. Or as William Kunstler said, we're going to use a system to destroy the system because we want to keep the commie revolutionaries in the street. It's the same line of thinking. It's the same cynical game. We see through your bullshit. Okay? It's not free speech. You're weaponizing constitutional ideals to achieve, ironically, a very illiberal outcome. Because it's turning out to be an invisible dictatorship by the private sector oligarchs. That's going to end. Under a radical civic nationalist government, if that ever comes about, and I pray to God it does, we're coming after you politically. Don't worry, you're going to keep your wealth, but you're going to have to pay higher taxes. We're going to have to definancialize the economy. You know, this Reagan-Clinton hyper-financialization, that's going to be balanced out with production, just like it was in the old days. And you're not going to be able to dictate trade policy and national security policy. Because when we say we're not going to really trade with Russia and China, there's going to be no ifs, ands, and buts. We're going to have to make a long-term plan to wean ourselves off of products imported from China and Russia. And also, you're not going to be allowed to sell technology and services to China and Russia. That's the long-term goal. And that concludes the show. I really wanted to get that off my chest because the 1%, more than even the extreme left, the 1% in this country is the true enemy of our national security. And their interests need to be subjugated at times to the greater will of the national interest as represented by the state. This is where our government is going to become not necessarily authoritarian, but it has to become more authoritative. Because if we're to survive as a country, as a sovereign country, we have to make some hard decisions. We have to revisit some of our principles that we held cherished. And there's going to have to be some exceptions made. This is something we need to think really deeply about, really take stock about, exercise some humility and some intellectual integrity. And with that stated, I want to thank you all for joining me or listening to this show. And I look forward, hopefully next weekend, to another show with Herschel and I. Hopefully we'll have our guest that was supposed to be on Saturday but had to cancel for work-related reasons, which is perfectly understandable. So hopefully he will be on next weekend. But either way, Herschel and I will definitely have a show. Thank you all, and have happy Passover and a happy Easter. And I look forward to talking with all of you again. Thank you and good night, and God bless.